A sea fortress, a military base powerful enough to crush a European nation in the blink of an eye. With its massive capacity and cutting-edge arsenal, this global superpower held the balance of power with the strongest fleet on Earth, the ruler of the Pacific Ocean. 170 warships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, and over 400 aircraft of all kinds. Yet, in less than 3 hours, it was reduced to rubble, becoming the greatest humiliation in American history. An event that shifted the course of World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor. In the 1930s, as the Japanese capitalist regime veered toward ultra-nationalist militarism, never had Japan's ambitions been so openly declared.
As an act of hostility.
What they sought was not merely prosperity, but the dream of ruling the entire Asia-Pacific region. From a small nation on the East China Sea, they launched aggressive campaigns across East Asia, starting with Manchuria in China. The Second Sino-Japanese War erupted in 1937. In December of that year, Japan's most powerful military force captured Nanjing, the capital of the Chinese Nationalist Party. There, they committed one of history's most horrific massacres and mass rapes, leaving nearly 300,000 people dead. And they didn't stop. Japan expanded further into Russia's Far East, Korea, and Southeast Asia, territories then under British and American control. Japan's aggressive expansion irritated the world's top superpower. Washington began imposing a series of harsh economic sanctions on Japan, including asset freezes and trade embargoes on key goods like aircraft, metals, and especially oil. Japan's reserve of 6 million tons of oil was quickly dwindling. The fuel for war was drying up. Tensions between Japan and the US escalated rapidly, especially after Japan recklessly joined the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, forming a trio of aggressors opposing the Allies. At this point, war became inevitable. Sooner or later, it would break out. But Japan had no intention of facing the world's most powerful navy head-on. Instead, they needed a sneak attack, a strike from the shadows. But where? The answer: Pearl Harbor, located west of Honolulu on the island of Oahu in the North Pacific. Pearl Harbor was the most famous historical landmark in the Hawaiian Islands. Due to its strategic location, it had served as the main base for the U.S. Pacific Fleet since 1940. This was where the U.S. Navy concentrated its surface ships, submarines, and air forces of the Pacific Fleet. At the time, the Pacific Fleet was considered the most powerful naval force in the world, boasting over 170 warships, 8 battleships, 6 cruisers, 32 destroyers, and 5 aircraft carriers equipped with over 400 military aircraft. To protect the fleet and the entire archipelago, 43,000 soldiers and officers were stationed there, armed with the most modern weapons available, not to mention the support infrastructure, fuel depots, ammunition stores, and dense maintenance facilities built across the island. Thanks to this solid defense and the island's natural advantages, Pearl Harbor was deemed the strongest fortress on Earth. From this base, the U.S. Navy could control the entire North Pacific, reaching Japan, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. Because Japan's mainland was 6,437 kilometers away, Americans never seriously considered the possibility that the samurai army would target such a distant outpost. But America's assumptions didn't match Japan's plans. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, was the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. His goal was to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet, giving Japanese forces a free hand to seize control of East Asia and then negotiate with America from a position of strength. To achieve this, Japan launched a cunning two-pronged strategy. On one hand, They continued to engage in diplomatic negotiations, presenting themselves as cooperative. On the other hand, they secretly prepared their weapons for a surprise assault. The attack plan involved 2 waves of airstrikes using 3 main types of aircraft. Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, Type 11. Max speed 545 km per hour, equipped with a 20mm machine gun and 2 60-kilogram bombs under the wings. Aichi D-3A dive bombers, Type 99, known as VAL. Max speed 450 km per hour. Max range 1,400 km. Armed with 1 250-kilogram bomb under the fuselage and 2 60-kilogram bombs under the wings. Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, Type 97, known as Kate. Max speed 360 km per hour, equipped with either a 457mm Mk91 torpedo or 1 800-kilogram bomb under the fuselage. According to Yamamoto's calculations, the first wave would deliver a surprise blow, targeting battleships and aircraft carriers, as well as islands and air bases such as Wheeler, Hickam, Barbers Point, and Kaneohe. The second wave would follow up to eliminate any remaining targets. On November 26, 1941, from the Kure Naval Base, a Japanese task force named Kido Butai, consisting of the fleet's 6 most powerful aircraft carriers with over 400 planes, 2 heavy cruisers, and 6 fuel supply ships, set sail under the command of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, departing northern Japan for a location northwest of Hawaii. To maintain absolute secrecy, Admiral Yamamoto ordered that any ship encountered along the way be sunk immediately. If any American vessel was spotted before December 6th, the mission would be aborted. Fortunately for the Japanese, during the entire 10-day journey, they encountered no vessels. At 3:30 a.m. on December 7th, the task force reached its designated position, 300 kilometers north of Pearl Harbor. An alert was issued. Every member of Kido Butai was ordered to battle stations. 2 heavy cruisers launched Aichi E-13A1 reconnaissance seaplanes to check the weather. Shortly after, 2 more Nakajima E-8N seaplanes were deployed southward to scout the entire fleet. They returned with incredibly valuable intelligence. The U.S. forces were completely off guard. Under the dim light of dawn, waves pounded the shoreline. At exactly 6 a.m., the legendary Zulu flag was raised on the flagship Akagi. This was the same flag Admiral Togo used during the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, when he sank the Russian Imperial fleet. Following orders, Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida tied a white headband across his forehead, a samurai tradition symbolizing readiness to die, and climbed into the cockpit of his bomber. At precisely 6:20 a.m., the order to launch was given. On the ET's flight decks of the 6 aircraft carriers, 183 planes of the first strike wave took position. All aircraft took off in record time. The roar of engines echoed across the sky. The planes formed into V-shaped formations, advancing one after another at a speed of 231 kilometers per hour. As the Japanese squadron approached Oahu, a U.S. Army radar station, SCR-270, located at Opana Point, detected the incoming signal and issued a warning. However, a fateful coincidence occurred. At that very moment, the U.S. base was also expecting a squadron of American bombers arriving from the mainland for training. They assumed it was merely a drill. Flying at an altitude of 3,500 meters, the Japanese planes were enveloped in dense cloud cover, and the pilots were understandably nervous. It wasn't until around 7:40 a.m., when the sky began to clear, that Commander Fuchida saw Pearl Harbor come into view and rejoiced. Sticking to the plan, he directed the entire air squadron to circle along the northwest coast to approach the target. Through their binoculars, Japanese soldiers were elated to see 8 U.S. battleships neatly lined up. Oklahoma, Maryland, West Virginia, Tennessee, Arizona, Vestal, Nevada, and California, all fearsome war machines of the U.S. Navy. In addition, several cruisers and destroyers were also spotted. Unfortunately for the Japanese, no aircraft carriers were present. At 7:48 a.m., Fuchida sent the coded message, "Tora, Tora, Tora," along with a black signal flare. The attack had officially begun. The Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers swiftly closed in on the enemy warships. The Aichi D-3A dive bombers split into 2 groups. The first targeted nearby airfields to prevent any U.S. air counterattack, while the second group focused on striking the battleships. Without a coordinated defense formation, even the Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters were ordered to attack the airfields directly. At 7:53 a.m., just before the first bomb fell on Pearl Harbor, the message, "Tora, Tora, Tora," was sent again, confirming that the surprise element of the assault had been fully preserved. Sailors aboard the U.S. warships were jolted awake by blaring alarms and deafening explosions. Many, still groggy from sleep, scrambled to get dressed and rushed to their battle stations. The now famous message was transmitted back to command. "Air raid on Pearl Harbor. This is not a drill." The Japanese had chosen the perfect moment. That Sunday morning, a large number of American soldiers had gone to church services. The U.S. forces were completely unprepared. At the time, America was still neutral in World War II. Ammunition depots were locked, weapons weren't positioned for combat readiness. Aircraft were parked wing to wing in tight rows, and anti-aircraft guns were unmanned. The lead bombers and torpedo planes, armed with 800-kilogram armor-piercing bombs, launched direct attacks on the battleships Oklahoma and West Virginia. USS Oklahoma, anchored at the front of the row, had not yet started its engines when it was hit by 2 torpedoes and a cluster bomb barrage. Water flooded into every compartment. Moments later, more torpedoes struck USS Utah, a ship that had served the U.S. Navy for 33 years and had been disarmed to serve as a training target. Even the flagship USS Pennsylvania, though docked in a dry dock, was not spared. It was bombarded by 2 aerial bombs. Because the harbor was only about 10 meters deep, the Americans had grown complacent and did not deploy torpedo nets around the warships. Exploiting this, the Japanese devised an ingenious attack strategy. Their planes flew low over the water and released torpedoes at speeds of 30 to 42 knots directly into the hulls of the American ships. Within just 5 minutes, 4 battleships had been struck. USS Oklahoma capsized completely, with all 400 sailors on board perishing. Although it avoided the torpedoes, the battleship USS Arizona was bombed 5 times. At 8:10 a.m., a massive 800-kilogram bomb penetrated the deck and detonated in the forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded violently and split in half, killing all 1,102 sailors on board. This horrific moment became the most tragic symbol of the Pearl Harbor attack. On the far side of the harbor, the battleships Tennessee and Maryland were each struck by 2 armor-piercing bombs. California and West Virginia were both sunk. Nevada, docked at the edge of the harbor, nearly escaped the carnage thanks to the quick thinking of its crew, and some luck, as its boilers had already been heated and ready. The ship began to make its way out of the harbor. But fate had other plans. Japanese aircraft spotted Nevada and unleashed a brutal assault. 2 armor-piercing bombs, 4 general-purpose bombs, 1 torpedo. In the end, the ship was left stranded at the harbor entrance. One by one, the once invincible warships of the Pacific Fleet, the proud and mighty vessels of the U.S. Navy, were taken down by Japan's iron birds from the sky. Even though they were completely caught off guard, some Americans managed to fight back. Doris Miller, an African-American mess attendant and third-class petty officer aboard the USS West Virginia, ran to the engine room after torpedoes rocked the ship, took control of a .50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft gun, and fired at enemy aircraft until he ran out of ammunition. Two young pilots, Kenneth Taylor and George Welch, still groggy from sleep, rushed to their Curtiss P-40 fighter planes and managed to shoot down a total of 7 Japanese planes within minutes. But this was only the beginning. At 8:54 a.m., the second wave of 171 Japanese aircraft began to descend upon Pearl Harbor, their engines howling across the sky. This time, it was the cruisers and destroyers' turn to bear the brunt of the attack. Helena was struck directly by a torpedo early in the second wave, with its bow engulfed in flames. Raleigh suffered a massive hole torn in two, her side from a torpedo hit. Honolulu narrowly escaped destruction and continued providing anti-aircraft fire. The destroyers were attacked relentlessly, some capsizing, others hit by armor-piercing bombs that plunged straight into their ammunition magazines. But the situation at the airfields was even worse. The second wave unleashed a storm of bullets and rockets on Ford Island, and the airfields of Bellows Field, Wheeler Field, and Ewa Field, all vital U.S. Army Air Force's bases. American pilots at first believed it was just another training exercise. But when the D-3A dive bombers swooped in with the unmistakable insignia of the Imperial Japanese Navy, they realized, far too late, the truth. All fighter planes on the runways had been locked and parked neatly side by side, becoming easy targets for the Zero fighters' rockets. The seaplanes lined up in formation at Kaneohe Bay burst into flames. Pilots and ground crews on the airfield scrambled to shoot back with whatever they could find: rifles, pistols, even submachine guns. Anti-aircraft defenses were quickly reassembled and unleashed with surprising ferocity. However, due to disorganized firing and lack of coordination, they inflicted little damage on the enemy. In addition to the aerial assault, the Imperial Japanese Navy had also carefully deployed miniature submarines around the island of Oahu, aiming to cut off any chance of escape for ships that might survive the bombing. However, the naval attack proved far less effective. One Japanese mini-submarine ran aground and drifted ashore, resulting in one sailor becoming the first prisoner of war captured during the battle. The entire battle was fierce, chaotic, and utterly one-sided, lasting only 90 minutes. 20 Japanese aircraft were shot down. 4 mini-submarines were destroyed. 64 Japanese soldiers were killed. Yet these losses paled in comparison to the catastrophic damage inflicted on the United States. In less than 2 hours, nearly 20 American warships were damaged or destroyed. Over 300 aircraft were annihilated. 2,403 military personnel and civilians were killed, and 1,282 more were wounded. The surprise lightning strike by Japan on the morning of December 7th had awakened a sleeping giant. President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared in fury, "America will live in infamy." Newspapers across the country exploded with headlines. The Pearl Harbor attack instantly became the #1 focus of the entire world. The once mighty Pacific Fleet had been throttled. The Oahu Fortress, long considered impenetrable, had proven not so invincible after all. U.S. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall exclaimed, "This is nothing short of an earthquake." Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Congress formed a special investigative committee to launch a full-scale inquiry into the disaster. Was this all part of a calculated sacrifice by the U.S. government? Among the many conclusions drawn, one theory suggested the U.S. military had been so heavily focused on training exercises that they became blind to the possibility of an actual attack. Commanders were reportedly so concerned about internal sabotage that they locked up all anti-aircraft ammunition rather than distributing it to defense stations. The Navy failed to maintain adequate aerial patrols over the ocean due to lack of equipment. Yet the deeper the investigations went, the more mysterious and controversial things became. Many came to believe that it was, in fact, a deliberate setup orchestrated by President Roosevelt. Though the U.S. government labeled it a surprise attack, some officials suspected Roosevelt had known about it in advance. During World War II, America had watched the Axis powers grow stronger and more dangerous, especially Japan's fascist expansion across East Asia. It was a grim outlook for the Allies if they lost control of both European and Asian theaters. The U.S. wanted to enter the war, but at the time, public sentiment at home was firmly against it. So, some believe America cornered Japan into attacking first, then used Pearl Harbor as the perfect excuse to justify its entrance into the global conflict. In his book, Day of Deceit, The Truth About FDR and Pearl Harbor, scholar Robert Stinnett of the Independent Institute in Oakland, California, proposed another theory. After reviewing declassified documents presented to congressional investigative committees regarding the Pearl Harbor attack, he revealed, around 11 months before the surprise assault, Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet, along with Vice Admiral James Richardson, had issued multiple warnings about the possibility of a Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor. They strongly asserted Hawaii, the only U.S. state located entirely in the ocean, would be extremely difficult to support or defend if attacked by surprise. Their concerns were based on intelligence reports gathered by U.S. Navy operatives embedded in Japan. The code name for this intelligence program was MAGIC. On November 7, 1941, exactly 1 month before the attack, Admiral Harold Stark at the Pentagon sent a cable to the Pacific Fleet Command, agreeing that the situation in the region was developing into a full-blown crisis. A week later, another cable went even further, suggesting that the United States actually wanted Japan to strike first. That message instructed Admiral Kimmel to cease all intelligence activities related to Operation Magic and to begin relocating U.S. vessels, a move aimed at minimizing strategic losses. Immediately after that final cable, a series of unusual military maneuvers began to unfold. 2 aircraft carriers, 6 cruisers, 14 torpedo boats were urgently ordered to evacuate Pearl Harbor and relocate to Midway and Wake Islands, hundreds of nautical miles away. This detail has led many to believe U.S. military leadership had advanced knowledge of the attack and deliberately moved its most valuable strategic assets out of harm's way, leaving behind outdated battleships as sacrificial pawns, a pretext to justify entering the war. To reinforce this argument, analysts raised a critical question. How could America's advanced radar systems fail to detect 6 Japanese aircraft carriers carrying 400 warplanes, positioned just 350 kilometers from their target? Even more suspicious, on the night of December 6, 1941, just hours before the attack, President Roosevelt held a highly unusual, secretive meeting with his top war advisors. U.S. Navy Secretary Frank Knox, Chief of Naval Operations Harold Stark, Secretary of War Henry Stimson, Intelligence Advisor Harry Hopkins. The atmosphere in the room was reportedly tense and heavy, as if everyone was waiting for something imminent. Even after the attack, suspicions only intensified. One U.S. Navy admiral confided in his close friend James Steinman, saying, "I'm holding one of the greatest secrets in history." To this day, that question still echoes through the pages of history. Was it truly Japan, or was it America who held the upper hand at Pearl Harbor? While official history continues to declare the attack as a complete surprise by the Japanese, more and more historians, investigators, and members of the public have started to doubt. Did America already know? And did they choose to sacrifice their own in order to enter the war? Since the tragedy at Pearl Harbor, Countless investigations, declassified intelligence documents, decoded telegrams, and secret reports have slowly come to light. But instead of clarifying the story, they've only made it more complex, layered, and chilling. The cost was enormous. More than 2,400 American lives, nearly 20 warships, over 300 aircraft, and a stain on U.S. military history that may never be erased. But in exchange, the United States officially entered World War II. And just a few years later, America emerged as the world's top superpower, ending the war with 2 devastating atomic bombs and establishing a new global order that still stands to this day. Pearl Harbor. Was it a tragedy, a turning point, a nightmare, or a masterfully calculated move from the very beginning? The answer may still lie beneath the ocean floor, entombed with the wreckage of the USS Arizona, hidden in the memories that no one dares to speak aloud. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next one.